We have talked about the subjunctive mood, and now we're going to move on and talk about infinitives and the imperative mood. So first we'll review the rules and meaning of infinitives, then we'll review the rules and meaning of imperatives, and finally we'll work examples of subjunctives, infinitives, and imperatives. So infinitives are verbal nouns, which means that they can have the same functions, some of the same functions as nouns can. Infinitives do not inflect for person or number. So there's a default, which is neuter singular. We'll see that a little bit later when we see infinitives with articles. As with subjunctives, aspect is key to determining meaning. Infinitives don't have a time sense in and of themselves. They pick up their time sense from context. Infinitives can be present, aorist, or perfect in their tense. They also have active, middle, and passive voices. In English, we're used to either active or passive. To hit a ball would be active. To be hit by a ball would be passive. So the forms of the infinitive, we begin with a present infinitive. It has a present stem and present infinitive endings. We'll look at the endings in just a minute. The aorist infinitive has whatever the normal aorist stem is. Whatever the stem would be for a particular type of aorist, let's say in the indicative, we'll also see that for the infinitive. The aorist infinitive has aorist infinitive endings for the first aorist, but for the second aorist it has present infinitive endings. The perfect infinitive has reduplication as it does for the perfect indicative, and then it uses the perfect stem, the active or middle passive, and perfect infinitive endings. Let's look at the infinitive forms, and in the process we'll see what the endings are. So for the active forms, the present active is luane. So the ending here is this epsilon iota nu. For the first aorist, we have psi. Second aorist, we have epsilon iota nu, which is the same as the present. And then we have, for the perfect, leleukenai. And so we have the reduplication, the le, and then the actual ending here is kenai. For the middle, we have luesthai. And there's our present ending. For the first aorist, lusasthai, so sasthai is our ending. For the second aorist, we just have esthai, which is the same as the present. And then we have for the perfect, lelusthai. Finally, for the passives, we have luesthai, which makes sense because middle and passive are the same for the present tense. First aorist, luthenai. Second aorist, graphenai. Notice that that is different than the present tense. The aorist passive is a little bit of a renegade. And then we have the perfect lelusthai. So notice a few things here. All the forms end in alpha iota except for the present and second aorist active. So we have the ane ending for those two. Everything else ends in alpha iota. Note also that contract forms will sometimes change those vowels. So for example, we have the stem agapa for agapao. We put that together with the epsilon iota nu ending, and we get agapan. The alpha contracts with epsilon iota to just give an alpha with a circumflex. So this is the infinitive here. Agapan is the infinitive, present active infinitive for agapao, to love. Let's talk briefly about the meaning of the infinitive. So a common one is to do something. So for instance, I have come to do your will. That's from Psalm 40, and it's quoted again in Hebrews 10:7. Another way that we use the infinitive is with an ing English idea. An example is so that us saying, which would be the equivalent of so that we say. we'll see that example a little bit later from Hebrews 13. When we talk about infinitives and aspect, it's what you'd expect. The present tense imperfective aspect is going to be viewing the action from inside, as we've already covered, with the process more in view. So how does that apply to infinitive? Well, let's take a look at Matthew 4:17. Erxata ha Jesus kerusein. Jesus began to preach. The idea here is there's something of a repetitive idea here, that he preached over a period of time. For the aorist tense or perfective aspect, it's the same aspect as we've already covered. It's viewing the action from outside as a whole. So here we have Matthew 5:17, uk elphan katalusai ala plerosai. So I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. So we're not looking at these actions of abolish and fulfill so much as a process, but as a whole action. But in general, context always provides the exact nuance. Let's look at some common uses of infinitives. So one is just a simple substantive, like a noun. When it acts like a noun, often it has an article. We call this an articular infinitive. An example is from Philippians 1:21. Tazein Christos. To live is Christ. So tazein, and there is our neuter singular article going along with the infinitive, and this becomes then to live is Christ. Another example is a complementary infinitive. We see this often in English, where we use a verb and then the infinitive complements it. I want to go to the store. I came to see my friend. Very similar to English, we sometimes say I'm able to do something, I command you to do something, I wish to do something. Here's an example from Luke 6:42. Post dunasai legain to adelphosu. How are you able to say, and here's the infinitive, legain, to say, to adelphosu, to your brother, brother. And then it goes on, brother, let me take the speck out of your eye. Here we have the verb dunamai, and that often goes with an infinitive, to be able to do something. You are able to do, I am able to do. Here's some other uses of the infinitive. Sometimes the infinitive acts like a finite verb and it has an accusative subject. So here's an example from Hebrews 13:6. Hosta tharuntas hemas legain. Tharuntas is a participle meaning boldly or confidently. Hosta, so that, literally so that confidently, us saying. Here we have an accusative, first person plural pronoun, us, and then we have legain, saying, but we would translate that as we say. So that confidently, us saying, or so that confidently we say, and then it goes on from there. We have another example in the next section of a accusative subject with an infinitive. Infinitives are also often used with prepositions and often with the article. So diata is a good example. Diata, and we have legisthai. We have a passive infinitive here from Lego. So we have diata would be on account of, and then here we have the passive infinitive on account of it being said. So the sort of passive idea. Another example is aista, and this is the idea of unto or so that, or so something would happen. So we have aista parakalesai hemas. Parakalesai is an aorist active infinitive. Legisthai is a present middle passive infinitive, and we saw that it has passive meaning here over in Luke 9:7. Here we have an active, and this accusative, hemas, is being used here as a subject. We saw that up here with the accusative subject, and it's literally so us encouraging. And we would translate that as so we encouraged or so we urged. That's from 2 Corinthians 8:6. Another example is prosta, and that is kind of the idea of in order that something would happen. So prosta athenai, this is an aorist passive infinitive from theaomai, and the sense here is prosta in order to be seen. So it's this passive infinitive idea, in order to be seen by men. Matthew 23:5 is a speech to the Pharisees. For a full list of the common uses of the infinitive, see Mounce's textbook, sections 32:12 through 32:17. Let's move on to the imperative. As far as tenses go, we have the present tense, the aorist tense, and technically the perfect tense, although there are very few perfect imperatives in the New Testament. So the present imperative has a present tense stem, has a connecting vowel, epsilon, and an imperative morpheme. We'll look at those in a second. First aorist imperative has the aorist tense stem, active middle tense formative, which is sa, which we have seen before for the aorist, and it has a passive tense formative of the, which we've also seen before. And then it uses the imperative morpheme. Now the second aorist imperative is a little bit of a hybrid. So it uses the second aorist tense stem, which differentiates it from the present tense, and then it has the same connecting vowel as the present tense for the active and middle, and it uses the present morpheme for active and middle. When we get to passive, though, it suddenly switches over and looks more like aorist. So the passive tense formative is an eta as opposed to a theta eta, and it uses the imperative morpheme, which is the same as the first aorist passive imperative morpheme. So let's look at the imperative morphemes. So the second singulars, I'm putting asterisks here because the second singular forms are irregular. The others are very regular, and they're actually quite friendly. For the third singular active and aorist passive, we have to, and then for middle passives, we have stho. For second plural, active and aorist passive, we have te, and for middle passive, we have sthe. And then for the third plural, active and aorist passive, we have tosan, middle passive, sthosan. Notice how similar these are. To, stho, te, sthe, tosan, sthosan. Let's take a look at the imperative active forms. We're going to look at present, first aorist, and second aorist. Actually, the perfect does have some imperatives. There are a total of 5 in the New Testament. So it's not really worth looking at them in a lot of detail here. So the active forms here, second singular, lua, lusan, and labe. Notice that the second aorist has the same ending as the present. The only thing that distinguishes them is that we have this second aorist stem. The third singular is lueto, and then for the first aorist we have lusato, and then labeto. Again, the second aorist same as the present. We're just going to see that continually down the rows here. Then we see second perfect lueta. We should note that this is the same as the present active indicative second plural. And so only context will tell us the difference between those two. We'll see an example in a little bit where we're not sure whether it's imperative or indicative. And then we have, for the other second plurals, lusata and labeta. Finally, for third plural, we have luetosan, lusatosan, and labetosan. And let's look at the imperative middles. The second singular is luu, and again, we just have to learn what they are. They're not regular forms. So luu, lusai, and genu. We should notice for lusai, this is the same as the present active infinitive. And so we have a little bit of overlap but context will tell us the difference between these two. The third singular, luesto, lusasto, and genesto. Second plural, luesta, and notice this is the same as the present middle indicative second plural. So we have another overlap as we had in the active imperatives as well for the second plural. And then we have lusasta, genesta, and finally for the third plural, luestosan, and for the first aorist, lusastosan. For the second aorist, we have genestosan, which is the present tense ending, even though we have the second aorist stem. Finally, for the imperative passives, the present tense is going to be the same because middle and passive will be the same. First aorist, notice, is lutheti. So here is the the that we have as the tense formative, and then we have this t ending, which comes out of the blue. But again, these are irregular. But once you learn them, they're pretty easy to spot. And then second aorist, grapheti, notice that the tense formative here is just an eta. The third singular, that's the same as middle, lutheto and grapheto. Notice the active endings here. So the to for the aorist passives. Second plural, luesta, same as the middle. Here we have for first aorist, lutheta and grapheta. So again, we have these active endings, and we can notice here that this form is also the second aorist active subjunctive of the second plural. So there's an overlap there, but there's not going to be too much difficulty in telling those apart in context. For the third plural, the present's the same as the middle, and we have then luthetosan, and then graphetosan. So once we get past the first row, the endings are all regular, although the aorist passive does have these active endings rather than middle passive endings. Let's look at how aspect affects the meaning of the imperative. So for present tense or imperfective aspect, let's look at Matthew 6:33. Zeteta de proton tein basilean to theu. So here we have but seek, and that is a present active imperative. Second plural from zeteo, to seek, and then proton first, tein basilean, the kingdom to theu of God. So, but seek first the kingdom of God. Well, be seeking would work here in sort of a continuous sense, maybe a repetitive sense. Keep seeking the kingdom of God. So the imperfective aspect here does have a sense of continuation or iteration of an action. Now the aorist tense is going to have more of a perfective aspect. It's going to be in the perfective bucket. Within that bucket, there's some variation, but we sort of get it in a bucket first, and then we can look at what the possibilities are. So here we have ekapsan autein kai bale apasu. And so it's the idea of sever it or cut it off and cast it from you. What leads up to that is if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. Ekapsan is aorist active imperative, second singular from ekkapto. And then we have a second aorist here, bale, aorist active imperative. In this case, cut it off or sever it and cast it from you. We're not looking at the action as a process, we're looking at it from outside as a whole. But while we're looking at the aorist, let's look at Matthew 5:16. Lampsata ta phos humon. This is a third person imperative, which has the idea of let something happen. So let shine your light, or let your light shine. This is an aorist active imperative, third singular. But when we talk about let your light shine, we're probably thinking of something that's going to keep happening. So again, context always provides the meaning. Here's some examples of imperatives. So we have 1 Peter 5:5, homoios neoteroi hupatagete presbyterois. So likewise, young ones, young men, here we have an aorist passive imperative. It's second aorist. So we see the ate at the end. And so it's likewise, young men, be subject, and then to elders. So this would be a dative here, the ois ending. And we would probably add the as in our translation. So be subject to the elders from 1 Peter 5:5a. Another example is ha epi tu domatas me katabato mede es elthato arai ti ek tes oikias autou. We have two imperatives here. I've marked those in red, and we have an infinitive, which is marked in light blue. So this is ha, the, upon the roof, and the way the definite article is used here would be the one, epi tu domatas, the one upon the roof, may not, katabeto, let him not come down. So katabino means to descend. Let him not descend, let him not go down. Mede, neither, eis elthato, that comes from eis erkomai, to enter. So neither let him enter. So we have a couple of nice aorist active imperatives. These are third singular. We can tell it's aorist because of ba being the second aorist stem for bino, and katabino is built from the word bino. And then we have eis elthato, and eilth is your second aorist stem from erkomai. So we have let him not go down, neither let him enter. And then here is an infinitive from iro. Notice the alpha iota ending here. Because the present tense is iro, alpha iota rho. This is a second aorist again. And so we have a second aorist active infinitive, to take up. So let him not go down, neither let him enter, to take up, t, anything, ek, tes, oikias autou, out of the house of him, out of his house. So the one on the rooftop, let him not go down, neither let him enter, to take up. So this infinitive is working with the imperatives. Don't go down, don't enter, to take anything. Here's the example where we don't know whether we have an indicative or an imperative, and that comes from John 14:1. It says, pistueta eis tan thean, kai eis eme pistueta. Well, pistueta could be present active indicative, second person plural, or it could be present active imperative, second person plural. So it could be believe eis tan thean, believe unto God or believe in God, and probably also here. It could be and in me believe, or maybe also believe in me. But eis eme pistueta. So if it's imperatives, believe in God and believe in me, or believe in God, also believe in me. But if it's indicatives, it's saying you believe in God, also you believe in me. So he's stating it as a indicative fact rather than as a command. So which one it is? Well, context might suggest that it is an imperative. He's saying, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. But the indicative also works. Don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. You also believe in me, stating a fact. So you can figure that one out. Let's look at some examples from the Mounts workbook. For exercise 33, number 4, he's got part of Mark 6:10. I think I've added some more to it that he doesn't have. So we have Kai elegen autois, hapu ean eis eltheta, eis oikian, eke meneta heos an ex eltheta ekathen. And he said to them, so this is a simple-minded imperfect, and he said to them, hapu ean, where or perhaps whenever. Hapu ean, ean could be if as well, but together with hapu it could be whenever. So when or whenever, here we have SL theta. This is a second aorist. We got the elf from erchomai, so it's second aorist, so it's an aorist passive subjunctive. And the idea is whenever or when you might enter, we would just say whenever you enter, eis oikian, into a house, eke there, and then we have meneta. And this is a present active imperative. I'll use IMV as an abbreviation for imperative. And mena would be to remain or to abide. So abide there, eke, heos, until, heos on, until, and then on is kind of a particle, maybe for emphasis, until, and then we have xl theta. That's very similar to the verb we saw before, which was ace ale theta. This is just xl theta, you go out. So ace L theta is go in and X ale theta is go out. This is also an aorist passive subjunctive from ex erchomai. So we have until, whenever, or until indeed you go out, ekathen, thence or from there. So, and he said to them, maybe literally he was saying to them, because of the imperfect tense, whenever you enter, maybe you should enter if we wanted to get the subjunctive sense, but we would just say whenever you enter into a house, there remain, there abide, until, indeed, or until, pretty much untranslatable on here, until you go out, until you should go out, or until you go out from there. So Mark 6:10. My next example is from Mark 4:9, and it's not in the workbook, but I wanted to find one that had a combination of some of the things we've been studying. So this one has a combination of an infinitive and an imperative. Mark 4:9, kai elagen has eke hota akuein akueto. Well, there's an interesting one. We've got two forms of akuo, to hear, looking at us. And so, and he said, another imperfect, elegant, so, and he was saying, perhaps, context will tell us that, or just, and he said, has eke, so who, relative pronoun, and that is nominative, masculine singular, who, eke, has, there's just a present active indicative of echo, hota, an ear, who has an ear, and then we have akuein. Akuein is a present active infinitive from akuo, and so who has ears to hear, okay, and then akuato. And so here we have a present active imperative, and that is third singular. And this translates to let him hear, that third singular idea. So, and he said, who or whoever has an ear to hear, let him hear. Here's a nice example of an infinitive working with the verb eke. Whoever has to hear, it's a complementary infinitive. And then we have the command, let him hear. That's an imperative.